Hi everyone, my name is Carly Waterman and my lesson plan is for 11th and 12th graders. Two objectives are to restate two things to say to someone who is peer pressuring them during the scenario activity, and to define peer pressure and detect two instances where peer pressure might be seen. So my lesson plan is going to be mainly about peer pressure and the influences on why people start using drugs. But before we start, I'd like to ask everyone to either grab a notebook or something to write with, or you can use a phone or a computer. Just have something so you can take notes throughout the presentation. To start off, I'm going to ask 5 true or false questions, and throughout the lesson, I'm going to be going over them. So for the first one, true or false? The two most common drugs that are peer pressured in college are alcohol and vaping or nicotine. Number 2, 70% of teens who smoke have friends who smoked or started smoking because of peer pressure. Number 3, people hang out with certain people for social standings. Number 4, parents have the biggest influence on if their children do or do not get into drugs. And number 5, the most important thing in college to not get peer pressured is finding the right group of people for you to hang out with. So to start off, let's define peer pressure. Peer pressure is when one of your peers influences you to do something you don't want to do. Now, peer pressure comes in two forms: positive peer pressure and negative peer pressure. Mostly people only hear about negative peer pressure because when they hear positive peer pressure, they don't really think it's defined as peer pressure. But we see examples like this when we're in elementary school and you're doing homework with a friend and your one friend doesn't want to do homework and your other friend's like, come on, you have to do your homework. That's peer pressure, but that's positive peer pressure. Now, when we get to college, that's when we start adding the drug factor of peer pressure, which is most commonly negative unless your friends are telling you not to do something. Now let's talk about why peer pressure with drugs is commonly seen in college. This is because of 4 main factors. The first one being the fear of loneliness. Now, when you go to college, it's a new place with new people, and your goal is just going to try and be to find a group of people to hang out with. Now, as you start hanging out with these people more and more, you might find that they might not be the right group of people you should be hanging out with, and it can turn into a destructive friendship where they start to peer pressure you into doing things you don't want to be a part of at all. Now, the second factor is poor stress management. In college, there's a lot of stress when it comes to classes, exams, outside activities, if you're working during college, and all these elements factor in to the stress part. And sometimes people use drugs and different substances as an outlet for this stress. And then that's when you get peer pressure into doing it because people don't want to do it by themselves. Now, the third factor would be poor decision making. Now, one instant or scenario of you being peer pressured into something can lead to a chain of events happening constantly. And the last one would be Greek life. So, fraternities and sororities are a big part of college, and people sometimes go to college because they want to join a certain fraternity or sorority. Now, in a stat from Jeffrey Jergens in Drinking and Drug Abuse in Greek Life, he states 4 out of 5 fraternity and sorority members are binge drinkers, which is 80%. And in comparison to other research, it suggests that 2 out of 5 college students overall are regular binge drinkers, which is only 40%. So from 80% of Greek life students to 40% of normal students, that's a big gap of how peer pressure could be involved in that Greek life. The two most common drugs that are peer pressured on college students would be alcohol and marijuana. Now, alcohol is the most common abused drug, but when it comes to the most common abused drug when it comes to peer pressure, it would be marijuana. And this is because a lot of people experiment with alcohol on their own. They don't need to be peer pressured into doing it. But when it comes to marijuana, it is more common that people peer pressure each other to do it. And that's mostly because of access to getting it. So In a study by the Canadian Lung Association, they found that 70% of teens who smoke have friends who've smoked or started smoking because of peer pressure. And then only 38% of individuals between the ages of 15 to 24 in that college range report that they have been pressured by peers to drink beer or alcohol. So 38% is alcohol and 70% is marijuana, which is a big gap of being peer pressured by these two drugs. Here is a chart to show different things that teens are peer pressured into having an influence by their friends. 19% of teens report they would give up using a cell phone while driving if their friends did the same. 23% of teen girls feel pressured into having sex. 33% of teen boys ages 15 to 17 feel pressure to have sex. 55% of teens tried drugs for the first time because they felt pressured by their friends. And at the largest margin, 70% of teens who smoke say they started smoking because of their friends since they smoke or they felt pressured to try smoking. Now we're going to go into a scenario activity where I'm going to read you 3 different types of scenarios, and you guys are going to write down how you would react to these different situations. You were hanging with a group of your friends and they start drinking on a Tuesday night. You know you do not want to drink since you have an 8 a.m. the next morning. They say, "One more drink won't hurt you." What do? Now, pause the video so you can write down your thoughts of how you would answer this. So, in this situation, you want to go with your gut feeling. If they continue to pressure you, just say no. If they do not listen when you tell them no and they continue to bother you, just leave the room. They might judge you and make fun of you, but you are doing the right thing for yourself, especially since you have an early class the next morning. The next scenario is your friends tell you that you are being lame for refusing a drink. How do you react to that? Pause the video so you can think about how you would react to this situation. So at first you might be a little bit embarrassed, but you know it is best for your body. If you don't want to drink, don't do it. Don't get sucked in with the names that they might call you. Be confident with your decision. The third and final scenario is you are a star player on your sports team at college, and you got a scholarship to play there. Some of your friends who are also on the team start smoking marijuana. You know they might be drug testing your team soon, and they force you to smoke with them. What do? You can also alter this scenario to fit into something that you're interested in, like a club or a different activity. Pause the video so you can think about how you would react to this. So you tell your friends that they might be drug testing soon, and if the test comes back positive, you guys can't play anymore. If they don't care and continue to smoke, just leave the room, because if you get caught with them smoking, you're all going to get in trouble and kicked off the team. You're at school to play your sport, not to get in trouble so you can't play anymore. I'm going to give you guys a real example of something that I experienced firsthand that has to go along with these different scenarios. So I'm a club volleyball coach, and we travel around the country to go play different teams. And there's this other local club, and they were away for an overnight tournament. So when we go away, all the girls get their own hotel room. And so it's like 4 girls to a room. And there was these 2 girls on this one club team, and the one girl was pressuring the other to smoke. And these 2 girls were the star players on their team. And the one girl was pressuring and was like, "Hey, like, we're the best players, like, no way we can get in trouble, like, even if we got caught, like, they're not gonna kick us off the team," and like saying all this stuff. And then it was like a motel, not a hotel, so like they had the windows on the outside, so the coaches were doing like their nightly checks, and they saw smoke in that room, so the coach knocked on the door, and the girls got in trouble and they got suspended for the rest of that tournament, and they were asked to leave the team. So then the other tournaments, their team started losing like every single game, and like this was a very successful team, and without those 2 star players, they started just losing everything. And then other girls on the team just started to quit. So the team became absolutely nothing, and they lost that whole age group of a team. And it really sucks that just because of those two girls who wanted to do something selfish, or that one girl who was pressuring that other girl to do it, cost the rest of the team their whole entire season. So that's just something to think about, and it went along with the last scenario, just to put in perspective how big of consequences peer pressuring can have on people. Now, the most common answer in that scenario activity was to simply say no. And sometimes saying no isn't going to be as simple as just saying no. In certain situations, the easiest thing to do might just be to get up and leave. Because if those people are pressuring you into do things you don't want to, and then you say no and they're not listening to you, then they might not be people that you want to hang out with anymore. And then at that point, you're probably going to want to go and find other friends. And you might think to yourself, how am I going to go find other friends? It's going to be so hard. But you're at college, you're starting over, and there's so many people that go to school that it's going to be easier for you to find a new group of friends to hang out with and to do things that you want to do. And an easy part of this is joining different clubs and activities, because if you have something in common with someone else, that's where you find your real friends, because you guys have similar interests in different things. So you're going to have something to talk about all the time. Also, another trick that I used in high school that might not work in college would be to blame your parents. So my parents growing up always told me if I was in a situation where I didn't want to do something, to blame it on them. So like if my friends asked me to go do something that I didn't want to do, I'd simply text them and be like, hey, like my mom's being annoying, she won't let me leave. And like my parents would be okay with me blaming it on them because it was something I didn't want to do. And now those people aren't going to go call my parents and try to pressure them into letting me go out. So it's just an easy escape to use if you need something to get away from a sticky situation. Now we're going to talk about like having real friends. So like I said before, if you have a group of friends that are pressuring you constantly to do something you don't want to do, and then you say no and they keep pressuring you, they're not your real friends. Because if they were your real friends, they'd listen to you after the first time you said no. They wouldn't keep pressuring you to do something you wouldn't want to be a part of. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about why people get into drugs and what influences them to do drugs. So there's 4 main components, which are where you live, your cultural background, your parents, and who you hang out with. These 4 are the main influences on why people get into drugs, but there's definitely way more influences of why people start using drugs. So to start, where you live. So neighborhoods with high crime and violence rates have a higher chance of getting into drugs compared to neighborhoods with low crime and violence rates. Now, the next factor would be cultural backgrounds. So according to Drugs Across the Spectrum, European, American, French, and Chinese adolescents were found to be more affected by peers and drug use compared to African Americans. Also, U.S. teens were seen to show higher rates of illicit drug use compared to European teens, while U.S. teens have lower rates of cigarettes and alcohol compared to European teens. Now, the third major influence would be parents. Now, some people might think that parents have the highest influence on their children, whether if they do drugs or not, but that's not the case. So, growing up, your parents were most likely telling you what you couldn't and can do all the time. And this causes for people to rebel against what they say. So it makes them not want to listen to their parents. Also, when you go to college, your parents aren't around as much. So you really don't see them, and they're not going to be there to tell you yes or no when you're asked to go do something with your friends. Also in Drugs Across the Spectrum, it states children of mothers who smoke during pregnancy are more likely to be dependent on nicotine. So this is also something to be aware of, that just because if you know your mom smoked while you were pregnant, this could be a cause of why you could get addicted to nicotine. And the last major influence, which is definitely the biggest reason why people are peer pressured into doing things, is who you hang out with. So people don't always hang out with certain people to be friends. It's more of a, I want to hang out with this group of people so I'm cool and popular. But that's not why you should be picking your friends. You should be picking your friends because you respect and trust them and want to hang out with them, not just to look cool in front of other people. In a study, it states 28% of kids say that giving into peer pressure helps them move up the social ladder. So if you apparently give into peer pressure, you're deemed cool and popular. And that's definitely not the case at all, because if you're doing all these stupid things like drugs, some people might want to hang out with you, yes, but other people aren't going to want to hang out with you because that just causes trouble, and people aren't going to want to be into that type of activity in their free time. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before wrapping up this video is that the most important thing in college to do when you get there is to find the right group of people for you. Because if you find the right group of people to hang out with, the chances of you getting peer pressured are very low. Then you don't have to worry about anything that we really talked about throughout this video. If you find the right group of people with the same interests as you and people that you'll have fun with without getting into different drugs, that's the right group of people for yourself. And that's something you need to be aware of before going into college. All right. Now we're going to wrap up by going back into those true or false questions. So grab that notebook that you had or your phone or computer, and we're going to go over those questions. So now I want you to write down your answer after watching this video, and we're going to compare how you did in the beginning and at the end. And hopefully your answers are different in a good way now compared to at the beginning of the video. So the first question, true or false? The two most common drugs that are peer pressured in college are alcohol and vaping/nicotine. All right, this is false. Alcohol and marijuana are the two most used drugs when it comes to peer pressure. And this is because college students are most likely to try vaping and nicotine on their own, while marijuana is more pushed on others or peer pressured on others. Next question. Number 2, true or false? 70% of teens who smoke have friends who smoked or started smoking because of peer pressure. This is true. We saw in that diagram that the huge gap of people who have smoked just because they were pressured by their friends. Number 3, people hang with certain people for social standings. This is true. This isn't always the case, but most of the time people do hang out with popular people just to get noticed. But hanging with these people isn't always what's right for you. Number 4, parents have the biggest influence on if their children do or do not get into drugs. This is false. It's who you hang out with has the biggest influence on if people get into or not into drugs, not because of your parents. Even though they do have an impact on it, it's not the biggest influence. And the last question. The most important thing in college to not get peer pressured is finding the right group of people for you. And this is true. And if you're going to take one thing out of this lesson, it would be that fact that the most important thing in college is to find the right group of people for yourself. And that is it. Thank you, everyone, and have a good one.